Hello my brothers and sisters of the Order, welcome back to the Order. I am Celtic Templar, and yes y'all, we are going back into another firearms video. And this is for the American Revolution holiday, so yeah. Now, I want to put this out here y'all. This gun is kind of one of the most iconic firearms in history, and in which it's one of the most famous flintlock, firearms in history, which is a musket. And yes, this gun is none other than the Brown Bess. Now, I want to put this out here. The Brown Bess is by far one of the most misunderstood firearms out there, in which I have to put this out. People say this myth that you can't hit the broadside of a barn with it. That's because they haven't had training with it. And two is kind of because of the fact of the wide variety of these guns which I'll get to very soon. But there is a myth that the British soldier couldn't even hit a broadside of a barn or something. So that's probably the British soldier's fault, not the gun. But what I have to put this out here, y'all, is the major fact that these guns are really awesome and really badass. Now, I will leave links down below in the description if any of y'all want to see people firing these guns, because these things are awesome. I will leave a link for Skellagrim, who does own one of these guns. I don't know if he still does, so yeah. But yeah, I'll leave a link down below if any of y'all have any ideas of what you want to see about these guns. But why don't we get right into the video? Now, where does the name Brown Bess come from? Well, there is not that much information, but there is a weird story that goes around that it was actually named after none other than Queen Elizabeth I of England. I don't know if that's true, because there's not that much information that proves that, because it makes no sense. So, yeah, we don't really know. However, we do know that it was first issued in 1715 to 1720, so it's kind of 50-50 because we don't really know, because there is a wide variety of manufacturers out there, so it's still, we don't know. However, it was later on finally used in the late 1800s, in which this gun had seen a wide variety of conflicts, not just part of the British Empire, but also many other empires or countries in history. Now, I want to put this out here. First time it ever saw combat was during the first Indian Wars in the 1700s, and as such, it would later on finally be used in the Anglo-Zulu Wars, mostly by the Zulu. However, I have heard that somehow some British colonial military groups in the area of Zululand, as it was called, did use these guns, so I don't know if that's true or not. But I want to put this out here. There are many designs, such as from the 1715 long pattern, which was the first model. Then there was the 1740 short land pattern, and then the 1797 India pattern, which this one was the shortest one of them all. Then there was also the 1802 new land pattern, which this is when the gun finally has rifling in it. No longer a musket, but now a rifle. And as such, then there was the 1811 new light infantry land pattern. Yes, that's a mouthful, I know. And as such, the length design went from 62.5 to 55.5 inches overall length. And then there would be the weight distribution, and sometimes it would increase or decrease over time from 10.4 to 10.6 pounds. So it does make weird sense, but this was only the infantry model, meaning this was only the British Army itself. And in fact, the cavalry, the British cavalry, did have their own design model in 1796, known as the cavalry carbine. It would have only around 42.5 inches, and as well 7.37 pounds. That's actually incredibly light and short, if we think about it. And as well, the British Marines would actually continue using the flintlock, the same flintlock model, over the time in history, such as the 1778 Sea Service pattern, 53 inches or 53.5 inches is what I hear, and then there's also it only weighing 9 pounds. So why would it be different compared to the infantry model? Simple, you're on the deck of a ship. You're not gonna want to have a big, longer gun if you're gonna be moving around, said, deck of a ship or going underneath or such. You're gonna need it to be a little bit smaller and a lot lighter, in which they made it that way. Now, I want to put this out here. Also, its caliber is a .75, or in this case, a 19 millimeter, which is somewhat slightly bigger than the diameter of my thumb, which that ball bearing would have a bigger diameter than my thumb would. So that's saying something. And as well, its effective range is somewhere around 328 yards or 300 meters. And as well, its maximum range is around 1,203 yards, or in this case, 1,100 meters. Its muzzle velocity is somewhere between 13 to 18 feet per 1,800 feet per second. So that's actually a lot, or in this case, 4 to 550 meters a second. So that's extremely dangerous still. But the thing is, this gun was incredibly dangerous for the time in history. One major thing we do have to understand is, by this point in history, these guns were effective as extremely dangerous for one major reason. They were technically the AK-47 of its day. Now, I hear many of you already, Templar, what do you mean it was an AK-47 of its day? Kind of obvious. This thing was technically a wide variety used for the entirety of the British Army. In fact, the British Army was extremely big. Now, I will be making a video, hopefully soon, on whether or not the British Army was the greatest in the world, because I actually have seen people do videos on this. And there is a 50-50 type cause for this, but we do have to understand, I do not agree with the fact that people say that the British Army was the greatest in the world at the time. It kind of wasn't, for major reasons, but I think I'll have that for another video. In fact, the only major thing that was probably great about it was its wide variety of this firearm, in which there were hundreds of thousands of probably millions of these things actually used. And the thing is, the British manufactured these in this type of way that that's the horrifying, or the breadbasket of the said rifle, or the iconic image of the British Army, especially the British Redcoat, in which, you gotta imagine, this thing is probably one of the most widely used gun out there. And in fact, I don't know how I should put this, but wherever the British Empire has been, this gun has been there. In fact, it's actually been found in parts of Afghanistan, parts of the Middle East, as well as Africa, parts of Europe, and as well parts of South America and North America. And in fact, these are all antiques that of which are still working, which I kind of do love that. Now, the majorly countries that use them would be Britain, obviously. However, it would also be used by various Native American tribes, as well as the early United States, as when it was in its colonial years. And as well, it would also be used by the country of Haiti somehow, even though it was Canadian, or in this case, well, French occupied area. However, my best bet is that they sent guns over there to start a revolution against the French. So I don't know if that's true or not. It's kind of a little bit of misinformation if you ask me. But as well, even the Kingdom of Ireland, if now you don't know, Ireland was technically having its own little rebellions as well after the American Revolution. And it did have its hands on these guns, since these were in the hands of the occupying forces in Ireland. So they did use these guns. Now, also, it would even be given to the nations of Sweden, and as well the Netherlands, as well as the countries of Brazil, which this is another thing that apparently after many countries left the New World, such as Spain or France or Britain, a lot of times over, there were hundreds of these guns left in the United States and many parts of, well, especially in the Central America and South America, or as well in Canada, which I'll get to that very soon and you'll understand why this is very important. Now, it would also be used by the infamous Confederacy, who did use these guns. In fact, it's actually stated that mostly the entirety of the Confederate Army were now using not percussion caps, but actually flintlock firearms, such as this. But as I said, I'll get to that very soon. Then it would also be used by the Zulu kingdoms during this point in timeline. However, we don't know if it was used by the Zulus or by the colonial forces in the Zululand before they switched it up for the Martini Henry. Now, it would also be used by Spain, Portugal, the German Estates, or in this case, the Holy Roman Empire, or the Prussians, as we all know. But then it would evolve into their own model. the same could also be said about Austro-Hungary and Germany, which I do have to put this out here. Germany at the early points in history, there was this idiotic idea on this new invention. However, I think that one counts for something else, but I'm just including it, but you'll understand why. But then there would be Russia, which actually evolves their own model of the said, well, infamous ball bearing that of which it was used. Now, they did use the same bullet. However, it was technically the same heavy lead bullet. But the thing is, what they did is that they sort of actually made it look like a more modern bullet. Now, this is a small ceramic. This is the metal ball bearing like you get from a shotgun or something like that. Oh, look, I got a second one. This here. That's for safety measures. Anyways. What these things are is, this is actually what this major ball bearing would have looked like. However, it would have been a lot bigger. But what the Russians did is that they evolved it into a more bigger round. Now this is a 45 ACP, but you see my point. I'm just trying to explain on what this thing started to look like. They started to mold it into what you might see of a modern bullet. That's crazy. So the Russians evolved somewhat of a modern bullet, which I kind of find that a little hilariously awesome at the same time. But as well, it would also be used by the nations of Canada and other British colonies, as I also have to put this out here. Now, it will also be used by Mexico as well. Now, Mexico did get their hands on these guns a lot, and you'll soon see how and why. Now, majorly, when we understand on why these guns were widely used out there in history, it's kind of because it was kind of like the AK-47 of its day. It was incredibly easy to manufacture, and as well, the weird thing is, this thing had no rifling for a long time until later on, before the War of 1812. However, it stated that that model wasn't exactly fully issued to the entire army of the British or Canadian forces. So this gun was still being a matchlock or a flintlock type design, which I have heard there is a matchlock model. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know because I haven't heard or seen a model of that. However, if you ask me, it sounds more like a bunch of hoo-ha, but I think that's more of the earlier models. And as such, these were technically mostly cheaper and not as effective. So, yeah. But one thing we have to put in history books is the fact that these guns were widely used. And as such, there are weird models, there are changed models, there are this idiotic models, which I'll tell you why some of these things are idiotic. You'll understand why. But as well, when these guns were actually always issued out to the entirety of the British Army, they actually modified them over time. And in fact, it stated that its original shot was somewhere between 3 to 4 shots a minute, or in this case, 2 to 3 shots early time in history, which this is actually what its normal shot radius was in that time of a minute. However, before the Battle of Culloden, for example, the British Army were drilled to actually fire not 3, but 4 shots a minute. Now think of that for you. 4 shots a minute. That's kind of horrifying due to the fact that's going to be a lot of bullets coming at my group, and it's not going to end well. However, the major drawback of the Brown Bess, which I kind of find both a pro and a con, I guess. Wait, I don't know if you would call this, because it's kind of a con to me, but it's also a pro for one major reason. Pro reason, it's fast to reload. Con is the fact it makes it very inaccurate. And that would be the fact that the bullet that you would fire would be smaller than the barrel. Meaning it's just bouncing around in there. In fact, this small bullet would end up bouncing vigorously all throughout the said chamber. Meaning it's not going to go whoosh outward. It's just going to sometimes even swirl inside the barrel, and God knows where it's going to go. Which is why those muskets were kind of horrifying. But the major thing is, that's probably the most scariest thing about the British Army with those guns. If you get a bunch of guys that use these things. They're gonna just point them down range, and it's not gonna end well for your troops. But one thing I do have to put this out here, there was a type of idea that did come around in history, and that would be sometime during the, well, American Revolution, and in which it's actually stated that the flintlock would actually have what you might call a type of buckshot, I guess you could call it this, but I wouldn't call it that because what they did call it is, I don't know why they called it this, but it's called ramming rod. I think that's because somebody accidentally fired their ramming rod out. I don't know if it's true or not. I'm just trying to find that out myself. But as well, there were many design variations of calling it this, in which originally it was known as last shot. In other words, if your commander calls a last shot, you had to use this type of bullet, which it was the normal paper wadded design as like this. However, what this was done is that they would bite the cartridge, pour it onto the flintlock mechanism, then close the pan, and then pour the rest in. And as well, this stuff right here, this last shot, it would have buckshot, or a small ball bearing like buckshots, like I don't know how many, but as well, it would be underneath the main bullet. So in other words, this technically adds a shotgun blast with your rifle, or musket, or whatever you want to call it at this time. And that would be kind of horrifying. So just imagine a wave of your own troops getting massacred like that. In fact, this type of military design system was actually used even by the Confederate Army, especially at the Battle of Gettysburg, when they especially used it when it came to the rebel yell. Now, you gotta imagine how horrifying that is if you see Confederates using that, especially at the battles, that especially all throughout the American Civil War, using a rebel yell with that design firearm. That's kind of horrifying due to the fact this thing acts like a shotgun if you use it. But major thing is, when these guns were actually used also during the American Revolution, this is actually what I find very horrifying also, is that when the Scottish, yes, the Scots who fought for England during the American Revolution, which I will probably have to leave a video for that also, and in such, when the British actually had, well, the Scottish fight for them, it was actually stated that the Highland Guard or Highland Divisions had actually designed a form of military charge with the mix of the Highland charge and with the British military morale. Meaning this Highland divisions, what they would do is upon loading their flintlock muskets, they would actually charge up and actually fire the gun while charging with the bayonet attachment and actually plunge it deep into your opponent. Meaning, while this Highland charge is going on, you hear these cries of these Scottish warriors just charging into you while they're firing and also stabbing your best friend, and then they're going to go after you. It's not going to end well. So this is kind of why the Highland Dragoons were probably the most horrifying division in the entirety of the British Army. But I think I might leave links, or I might need to make a video on that probably very soon, because it might curious viewers might actually want to see this incredibly. But yeah. Now, how many people did use it in the American Revolution? Well, the only people who used it in the American Revolution on the U.S. would actually be those who actually captured them after the American Revolution. In fact, most of the time, the American Revolution, when they first started, most of them were using the rifle. Now, this would be a Kentucky long rifle, or Philadelphia long rifle, as it was known at the time. And such, this was actually better than the this type of, well, flintlock musket barrel. Major reason because it had rifling in it, and it's going to go a lot further. Problem is, the major drawback was the fact it had a wooden ramrod and it had a rifling. Meaning it was going to take a lot longer to load, and you don't want your wooden ramrod to break. Which, that's another key feature of the British Army. They had actually now manufactured a metal ramrod, not a wooden one. And in such, that is probably what made the British Army much more effective, because it actually made it loading the gun a lot faster. So that's kind of horrifying. But one major thing we have to understand is when the United States got their hands on it, they did try to modify it to a certain pattern. Problem is, they could never get it right, and it took us a while until we made the Springfield. So yeah, but still, Springfield flintlocks were somewhat of a ways off until the Mexican-American War. But the thing is, even during the Texas Revolution, for example, which this one I kind of like to explain, the Mexican army actually had hundreds of thousands of these things. In fact, it's actually stated that Lopez de Santa Anna had actually ordered at least over 1 million or so from Great Britain. I don't know if that's true or not, because in truth, Mexico was in debt to Great Britain a lot, and this might be one of the major reasons why. And the fact is, when Santa Anna had ordered these guns were in his entire army. And in fact, Santa Anna had ordered his troops to be just like the British, to regulate and train his men to actually fire it. They didn't know how to do it at all. It did not end well, especially for him at the Battle of the Alamo, for example, which he had lost more men, and then there would also be more infamous battles also down the line, which also would lead to, well, his entire defeat at the Battle of Shinto, which, yeah, his troops were not very good with, in fact, most of them were kind of conscript, and most of them were not exactly, well, they were, well, pretty much that's forced into the army. In fact, they didn't have much of a choice, so I don't think this would have ended well. But one thing I do have to put this out here, this gun was entirely one of the most dangerous guns in the entirety of history. Mainly because it was kind of, well, as I stated, like an AK-47. It's extremely out there. And in fact, it kind of acts kind of like an AK-47 to me, because you can't hit the broadside of a barn in an AK for me, because I trust me. Now, before anybody starts saying I'm an Armalite fan, no, I'm a Heshenikov fan, so don't even think about it. Because I've heard all the hate speeches, especially from Brian, especially because I already know he's probably getting after me now. But anyways, back to the topic at hand. One thing I do have to put out here, though, there were many modifications to the Brown Bess. One that of which the Prussians manufactured. This was a breech-loading system. This breech-loading system in the gun was weird. First you had to do is pull back the, well, flint and the lock, or as well have the pan open. What you then did is pull back this weird secondary trigger hammer. I don't know why, but apparently this thing, what you had to do is pull it back, and it supposedly works, this trapdoor system. I don't know how this thing works, but there are not many of these things out there, which I am trying to find pictures of it, so hopefully it's on here. If it's not, you see my point. So, yeah, this gun is very widely known as a weird gun, or the early needle gun, I guess I could call it. But you gotta admit, it kind of is awesome. Now, I do have a major problem with these things, though. One, the fact is, these things are not easy to find. Now, there are many people replicating them. I don't know if they still have the rifling in them. However, these things have been known as the Flinch Pan, because this thing makes a massive spark when you fire it. Meaning, all this smoke, in which this is a major reason why you never saw a British soldier being left-handed. Meaning, if you were left-handed in the British Army, it was not going to end well for you. You would go blind in your eye. In which, this is why most of them are always right-handed. And as such, it was kind of horrifying just to actually get shot by this gun in particular. Now, how long was this gun used? Well, that's the thing. It was used so long, even till to this day, many people do use it for hunting, which I do approve of this. This thing is incredibly badass, especially if you get shot by this thing. Now, in major points, I do have to put this out here. This gun is probably a little too dangerous to get shot with. Meaning, you get shot with this thing, there's probably no way you're going to come back around. Now, since the ball bearing is made out of lead, I do have to put this, the bullet will go through you like shrapnel. Meaning, it may fly like a bullet, but that is until it hits you, and it starts to form into like a shrapnel shard. And just tears away. Oh god, I can't even explain this without actually this visioning it, which is, that's just horrifying. But you see my point. But yeah, these guns were so widely used, I can see why the British Empire would use it so very long until they would later on replace it by the Martini Henry. Now, by the time in history of the late periods, especially by the American Civil War, they had started using the mini ball. Now, the mini ball, it's not mini, it's just named that because of its French inventor. However, it is stated that the Confederate Army, as I stated before, did use these things with incredible dangerous forms. Majorly because this is what I actually find hilarious, is the fact that the United States tried to do a gun control, I guess you could call it this, but I wouldn't call it that. And that would be a type of form that any of non-commissioned military, or in this case, if you weren't in the military, you do not have permission to own a percussion cap firearm. However, you do have the right to own a flintlock firearm, and of which most of the South did have flintlocks. However, you could, by 1859, I think, most of them were being switched out for a percussion cap. That is, if you could afford it. However, in many Civil War films, I always see them using a percussion cap when they should be using a flintlock for the Confederate Army. So, a little bit of a nitpick for history, so yeah. However, if any of y'all have ever seen a video game, for example, that has this gun, or or even a movie, especially, that has this gun, such as The Last of the Mohican, or as well the Patriot, or Gettysburg, or even Gods and Generals, or something in there, as well, even the Alamo movie, which these guns have been seen in those films. And such, we do have to put this out here. This gun is by far probably one of my favorite of flintlocks out there, besides the Kentucky long rifle for major reasons, but I think I'll get to that very soon. You'll understand why, because this gun was pretty much one of my favorites. But yeah. Anyways, guys, like and subscribe. Also, click the bell button for more notifications. And as well, also, if any of y'all have any firearms you want me to talk about, please let me know down in the comments below. And it doesn't even have to be a firearm. Hell, it could be a cannon, or even, oh God forbid, a flamethrower or something. I don't know. But anyways, as long as it's a firearm or some sort of weapon of warfare, well, I can hopefully put it here. Anyways, guys, hopefully see y'all in the next one, and hopefully see y'all. Anyways, guys, been Templar. Have a great day.